Hello, everyone. Well done. Welcome to Double Take, Stories That Make You Think Twice. This is our 5th annual session, and I want to start by giving some thanks. First, thanks to all of you for being here. Second, thanks to the many people who helped organize this event, many from the President's office, and put in a lot of hours to bring us to this point. But most importantly, thanks to our storytellers for tonight. Thanks for your time and thanks for your courage in sharing your stories. For those of you who are not familiar with Double Take, let me give you just a little bit of background. This is a storytelling event based loosely on The Moth. And just by show of hands, how many of you have heard The Moth? Okay, not as many as I would have thought. So it's a great program where people come up and tell real stories, often organized loosely around a theme. And that's what got us started on this. But part of the reason that we wanted to host this event at the University of Virginia is because everyone has a story. But too often we assume before hearing someone's story that we know what it is. And we make judgments or assumptions about the person. And then if we're lucky enough to hear their story, we're often surprised. Either surprised because we assumed something that wasn't true, or surprised because we found out we had something in common that we didn't know that we had in common, which is why we called it Double Take, Stories That Make You Think Twice, because it often makes you think twice about the people who are telling stories. And so part of the goal of this event is not simply to let you understand stories of those who are telling the stories tonight, but to make you realize that the person sitting to your right and sitting to your left also has a story. And the hope is that when you leave here, you'll remember that everyone you see has a story. And that before you judge them, before you assume you know what their story is, you're going to think, I should actually get to know this person and get to understand their story. And so in some respects, this is a way to exercise what I suggested to the first-year students at Convocation, that they try to live out the quote made famous by Ted Lasso, be curious and not judgmental. And my hope is that this event will make you even more curious about the amazing people who are a part of this community. So tonight's theme is the community of trust, and the stories will be based, again, loosely on the speaker's experience in understanding the importance of developing and maintaining a sense of trust in the community. So without further ado, let me thank all of you again for being here, and let me invite the first speaker. Each speaker will introduce himself or herself to the podium. Thank you again.
My name's Thomas Hall. Very loud. Gonna get that farther from me. So back when I was 21 and had quite a bit more hair than I do now, I was a third year in the college and had just been reelected to a second term as chair of the university's honor committee. And it was April of that year, April of 2001, that I was sitting up on the 4th floor of Newcomb Hall in the honor committee's offices, and an honor advisor walked in and told me that she had some news to share. And she told me that a professor had just come in and initiated 160 honor cases. And after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I had quite a few questions for her. It turned out that professor was Lou Bloomfield, who was a professor in the physics department, a longtime professor in the physics department, and he taught a class called How Things Work. It was a very popular, very interesting class in my time as a student here, And it was particularly popular with non-science majors who needed to get a science credit to graduate. And Professor Bloomfield assigned the same paper every semester, 5 to 7 pages on the physics of an everyday object. Some students would choose something from the world of sports, the physics of baseball, the physics of hockey. Some students might choose something closer to their university experience, like the physics of a beer keg. And these students, in something novel at the time, remember I'm ancient, this was 2001, had to submit their papers electronically. Well, Professor Bloomfield grew concerned that some students were not submitting original work. And again, in a fairly novel idea, he wrote his own plagiarism detection software, an idea that seems kind of quaint in an era of ChatGPT, but he developed this software all his own and ran this vast database of physics of an everyday object papers through that software. And in doing so, he found those 160 instances that looked like him to plagiarism. Incidentally, that honor advisor who walked that case into the honor offices way back in 2001 is now my wife and is sitting here with our 2 daughters. And after she brought those cases into the honor committee offices, a couple things happened. 3 things. First, we went to then University President John Castine, President Ryan's predecessor's predecessor, and told him, hey, look, we got these 160 cases. This seems like it's going to be kind of a big deal. We wanted to let you know. And I'll never forget his response. He said, look, thanks for letting me know. I believe, and the administration believes, in the concept of student self-governance. You all have this. Let me know how we can help. And that really struck me as like an institutional embrace of the idea of student self-governance. The second thing that happened, you'll remember this was April, just weeks before the end of the school year, and all of these 4th years had just rolled off the honor committee and were enjoying those precious last few weeks on grounds. April of your 4th year, just the most precious time. And many of them came back to the honor committee and helped us get organized and helped us plan how to adjudicate these cases fairly and even to begin some of the investigations of those cases. And then the third thing that happened was media attention. Most of you know that the honor committee operates under confidentiality. We try to keep all the cases confidential. And we thought when we got these cases, well, we'll just keep them confidential like we keep any other case confidential. Well, that plan lasted all about 7 to 10 days before the media started calling and asking, and all of a sudden there were front page articles in the Washington Post, front page articles in the New York Times. Katie Couric interviewed me for the Today Show out on the lawn. And again, in a sign of how ancient I am, I'll never forget a 1-hour NPR interview I gave in a phone booth at the Charlottesville airport, a phone booth that I'm confident is no longer there. And the honor system stood up under the scrutiny. It survived under the scrutiny. I spent my 4th year sort of managing the adjudication of those 160 cases. And it prompted a lot of tough discussions in the student body about, what students and what faculty wanted from the honor system. But a year later, I graduated, and I figured my involvement with the honor system was at an end as a graduating student. But it wasn't in at least 2 ways. One, the next chair of the honor committee was asking me for advice, and I stayed in touch with him and then with his successor, who's sitting right next to my daughters tonight, and with his successor and her successor and on and on and on until I kind of tallied it up. When I was asked to give this speech, in 16 or 17 of those honor chairs since I graduated, I've been in touch with to provide advice about the honor system, however valuable that advice is from someone who graduated from high school in the last millennium. But then the second thing was, when I was an undergrad, I got this vague idea that maybe one day I wanted to be a federal prosecutor. And that took a while, and I went to law school at UVA, and I had to work for a while to get the job, and I did get the job, and I was a prosecutor who specialized exclusively in white-collar criminal cases. fraud cases, mortgage fraud, Ponzi schemes, investment scams. And all of those cases involved lying, cheating, or stealing. And I had the privilege of going around the country and standing up in front of juries across the United States. And as I began my jury addresses, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about lying. Or ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about stealing. And in those rare cases, ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about lying, cheating, and stealing. Hit the trifecta. And when I did that, I really felt that experience from UVA kind of speaking to me. Now, sometimes my experiences here on grounds with the honor system seem like a long time ago. University of Virginia's had 2 presidents since then. I've had 2 kids. But then other times, it seems like it was just yesterday. And a lot has obviously changed since those times, but 2 things that haven't are my belief in the value of the community of trust that our honor system creates, and my fervent hope that the current generation of students will do their best to preserve it. Thank you.
My name is Anna Catherine. So I first learned about the impact of communities when I was in high school, but it was not quite in the way that I expected. During the first week of school, my junior year of high school, I arrived on Friday morning to my first period class, and I noticed that Casey wasn't there. Casey and I had met in 5th grade, and we were immediate best friends, the kind that literally went out and got the necklaces that was 1 heart cut in half that said best friends. We stayed close, and then when we entered high school, our friend groups kind of expanded and diverged, but we were always in each other's lives. About 10 minutes into class, a guidance counselor came to get me and said I needed to go to the office. As we started walking, I asked her what was wrong, and she just said I would find out in a few minutes. A lot of what happened in the days after that are kind of a blur, but I can remember that moment with such visceral clarity. Perhaps you feel this way about some of the best and worst moments of your life. As I walked to the office, I could look in the glass windows, and I saw my mom, and she was standing there, and she was crying. It turned out that Casey had died the night before in her sleep. It was completely unexpected. An autopsy later showed that she had something called long QT syndrome, which is a heart signaling disorder where, if it's undetected, it can lead to sudden death. For the next week, I just felt numb. I was 17, and I'd never lost anyone close to me before. I didn't go to school. I would just sit on the counter in the kitchen at my home with a big Costco-sized jar of animal crackers, and I would eat them, one by one, just staring into a void. I felt so alone, and I knew I wasn't alone. I knew that Casey's parents, her sister, her boyfriend were grieving beyond comprehension, but I still felt that way. Her parents asked those of us who were closest to her to come over to their house and help them talk about the memorial service. And it was there that I met 4 of her other closest friends. We had a pretty big high school, and I hadn't known these women very well before. But as we mourned Casey, we started sharing stories. We laughed about how she loved to re-record answering machine messages. Now, those of you who are young may not remember a time before cell phones, but we used to have landlines and answering machines. But rather than the typical greeting that we weren't home, she liked for us to re-record them with commercial jingles. Particularly, she and I were very keen on the Juicy Fruit commercial jingle, and I remember one day we spent about 2 hours perfecting singing it into our answering machine, much to my mother's chagrin. Her parents also shared her diary with us. She was an avid writer in her diary. And we cried when we read about how she had planned on where she wanted to go to college and how she was convinced she was going to marry her high school boyfriend, Alex, even at that point. I spent most of that year with this group of women, and I realized that as we shared our stories about her, we felt a little bit less alone. There were still really hard days when I would walk down the hall and I'd be sad, or I'd see something that reminded me of her. But then I would see Becca, and she would give me a hug, or I would see Catherine, and she would slide me a note that she wrote me. During my senior year of college, I was an English major, and my thesis was actually about Casey and about losing her. But it was also about, through that loss, how I had created these unexpected friendships and closeness that I might otherwise never have known. Those women are still 4 of my very best friends to this day, 25 years later. In losing her, I realized not only the impact of community, but also the impact of stories and in sharing stories. So much so that that actually became my career. After college, I went to graduate school for journalism. And the first class I took was a sports journalism class. And I realized that I loved storytelling through the lens of sports. Sports, after all, is a microcosm of society. The narratives of athletes, coaches, and teams help us interpret and understand our own cultures and communities. And no matter how famous an athlete is, they all need community. I may never shoot a basketball like Stephen Curry, or not yet, but we both attended Davidson College, and we've both been really shaped by the communities that we encountered there. After graduate school, I went to work for ESPN, the magazine. And of the hundreds of stories that I wrote about athletes, while the big-name athletes like LeBron James or Aaron Rodgers were exciting, to me, it was the power of the lesser heralded athletes whose stories could really connect people. In 2008, I saw a brief news headline about a high school swimmer named Brian. A year before, he'd been in a serious car crash. He'd coded several times in the ER and then suffered a 2-month coma. I reached out to Brian and his family, and I traveled to rural Maryland to learn more about his story. When Brian woke up in the hospital after 2 months of a coma, he couldn't speak. He couldn't move his body. He couldn't even blink his eyelids. But he could hear. And when he heard the doctors telling his parents that he'd probably be a vegetable for life, this once young, vibrant athlete, he was full of despair. He looked at the TV that was playing behind the doctors and his parents, and he saw a broadcast of an Ironman triathlon. And he remembered one goal that he'd written down in middle school, to compete in the Ironman World Championships in Kona, Hawaii. Over a year later, improbably, he did. Not without a lot of suffering and adversity and struggle in between, which was a huge part of his story. A week later, his story that I wrote was published on ESPN.com, and I was sitting in my office scrolling through the reader comments. Now, wiser people will tell you never to read the comments, but writers do it anyway. We can't help it. So as I was scrolling through, I stopped at one. "I'm sitting at my desk, crying," the reader had written. "I woke up today, and I didn't feel like being here anymore. But reading Brian's story, seeing his resilience, that has given me hope. Enough hope for another day." I saved that comment. When I started to struggle in my job, when times were difficult, when I faced challenges working in an industry that at the time was 95% male, I remembered those words. And I thought about all the communities, seen and unseen, that were connected through the power of story. I knew that it doesn't always set in right away. For me, it took several years to realize the impact that losing Casey had had on me and on those around her. A year after she passed, the 5 of us went to Figure 8 Island to a beach house of one of our friends. And on the first night we were there, we all took a small tea light candle, and we walked down to the beach just after dusk, and we found a tidal pool. And we waded in with the water just below our knees, and we lit our candles, and we linked our arms. Candles weren't significant to Casey. They weren't anything that had meant something to her in her life. But as the 5 of us reflected on the past year, we thought about what the light out on the water might represent. How you never know who or what will connect you to someone else. You never know where or when it might happen. But what's important is to be open to it, to look for that light, and to be the light for other people. We didn't know where our journeys would take us. No one in here knows where their story and their journey might take them. And there are times when we sit on a counter and we feel really alone. There are times when we lie in a hospital bed full of despair. But take a moment and look around. Because if you really look around, there is always someone there to help keep you afloat. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Catherine Flores, and today I will share my story of leaving El Salvador. I was only 12 years old, but I remember it as if it was yesterday. I didn't know we were leaving, and to be honest, I didn't have an American dream. America wasn't even in my dreams. So when I found out, I didn't have time to say goodbye to anybody except for my best friend. So within 2 days of finding out, I packed my memories in a small blue backpack and I was dragged out of the country. Salvadoran immigrants like me are known as tres veces mojados because we are soaked in water by 3 different rivers, 3 different frontiers. You see, to get here from El Salvador, you cannot just fly, you have to walk. So thus my mom and I, we started our journey through the 3 frontiers. To explain every step I took to get here will fill an entire book. So for Guatemala, I'll just say this. It was a blur of strangers and dark hideouts. And for Mexico, it was piling up in cars for days on end. Salvadorans stuck on top of each other because we couldn't fit. Thank you. Sometimes I lose my words and I cannot explain this whole story. But I remember this one car ride. I was sleeping on my mom's laps and suddenly the car stopped. I felt my mom's hands on my back, which woke me up. The car had stopped. She opened the door and she threw me out of the car. The police had found out we were in that car. It was hectic. It was like ants running directionless after being splashed with hot water. I remember my mom helping me cross this fence that divided the road from the safe place. Her bare hands grabbed the barbed wire, making enough space for me to cross. As I waited for her to cross, another mother was helping her daughter, a much smaller daughter, a 3-year-old girl, tiny enough for her mom to throw over the fence. As I saw the little girl land on the grass, my mom had already taken my hand and started running, dragging me across the grass. My legs too thin and too weak to run on my own. We then jumped into a pit where we waited and waited. Underneath the dirt and grass, we could hear steps. We could hear voices. We could hear each other's heartbeat. I had nothing to hold on to except my mother's hands and the many prayers we made. There was nothing we could do except pray and hope that those steps were the coyotes, which was the person that helps to cross immigrants across the border, and not the Mexican police officers. With scratches on my face and back, and my mom's bruised hands, we made it out. And within a few days, we crossed our last river, our last frontier. Once I stepped into the US, I was thrown from facility to facility. From the cages you see on TV, La Perrera, where they provided nothing but aluminum foil to cover, and then ICE Family Detention Center in Texas, where we fought for our case. After I arrived in Charlottesville, it did not feel like the US I had heard of. I would look outside my aunt's trailer home, see the batches on the street and the uneven pavement. The only difference was that surrounding me were no longer mango and paterna trees. It was oak and pine trees. And my mother tongue was tied. She was no longer the one speaking. And every time I tried to fool myself to think that the US was my home, I would look at my mom and see her crushed and vulnerable for the first time. And I'll realize the US was not my home. It was my refuge. From leaving El Salvador, my childhood home, which had been given to the Coyote as a payment, to arriving to Charlottesville with nothing but a trash bag filled with clothes and immigration papers. I remember the 12-year-old me who thought that one day she could go back and visit all the people she never got to say goodbye to. And I was welcomed with an asylum that said, "You don't get to see El Salvador for 12 more years." I lost my home. El Salvador became the box I checked when asked about my nationality. I felt a vagrant, stripped of any feeling of familiarity and belonging. That's when I started to question myself. What's home to me? Well, in El Salvador, home felt like rocking back and forth in a hammock while I told my mom about my day at school and ate freshly caught guavas. In Guatemala, home felt like falling asleep on my mom's arms, having a tamarind tree as a roof, and waking up in the morning covered in small yellow flowers that had fallen from the tree overnight. In Mexico, home felt like my mom guiding me through the desert with nothing but the stars to light up the way. And here in the US, home feels like having my mom sit within the community that has never left my side. Because after all, my mom was my first community. She is my first home. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Becca Jarrett, and I wish I could stand up here and give you a really coherent, profound narrative on what community and trust mean to me. On paper, this is a theme I really should have down, as there is really no other vehicle through which I could have learned these two things than my 5 years here at the University of Virginia. However, this is a night that is animated by candidness and vulnerability, so I come to you humbly with a story that is admittedly a little bit messy and very much so ongoing. As some of you may know, I've played soccer here for the last 5 years. The last 2 of those 5 years went in a direction I probably would not have predicted when I committed here at 16 years old. I tore my ACL meniscus twice. I have many scars here to prove it, and that was an experience that I truly, like I said, could have never predicted. I went from feeling like I was on top of the world and I could do anything to being helpless. It was in a practice the night before one of the biggest games on our regular season schedule. I was doing something I'd done a million times before, there was no contact, nothing out of the ordinary, and all of a sudden, it had happened. Now, excuse me for being a little bit graphic, but unfortunately an ACL injury is very specific and very recognizable to female soccer players. The sound, the way the person hits the ground, the way they scream, unfortunately, you just know what it is when you see it. So the second I hit the ground, I knew what I had done. Now, again, I don't remember much what happened from the second I hit the ground to waking up after surgery, but I do know one thing. 8 days had passed in that time, and it was all a blur. I know I got a lot of texts, I shed a lot of tears, and I ordered a lot of DoorDash. Everything else, I can't tell you much. The next concrete memory I have was being in a hotel room 2 days after my surgery with my mom. I was laying in bed, my leg was wrapped from my hip to my ankle, and I was dazing in and out of sleep. I was probably a little bit high too, but we don't have to talk about that. The TV was playing in the hotel room, and all of a sudden I realized that they were talking about me. It was the local news. My team had played Penn State that night, and there was an interview clip of my coach, who's sitting right there, who was describing me, my personality, and my presence as a teammate. And all of a sudden in that moment I realized this is my reality. The next 6 weeks, I would be on crutches due to my meniscal tear. I wouldn't be able to drive. I wouldn't be able to hold anything and walk at the same time. So I would need a lot of help. Suddenly, I went from being super independent, super self-sufficient, to entirely reliant on the people around me. I'd never been in a position like that in my life, and I was very afraid. Eventually, I realized that it was okay. It was okay to be vulnerable, and it was okay to ask for help. I'm not quite sure how I got there, but over time, I learned a way that worked for me. I learned how to ask for help from my friends. I learned how to say I needed things when I really did, because like I said, I couldn't do much on my own. That's the funny thing about trust and the funny thing about community. It is often when you need it the most that you feel the least comfortable leaning into it. And like I said, I was truly so uncomfortable leaning into it. But when you're thrown into the pool, you either sink or you swim. Luckily, I swam. It's not because I didn't have a great support network. I did. In fact, I felt so loved in those moments, but that didn't help. I was being held so tight and with so much love, and yet I felt like I was in free fall. I wasn't sure how that was possible. You see the people around you and they love you so much and you know it, but sometimes it feels as though you are, like I said, alone. Then, eventually, like I said, time passed. I'm not sure how I got over things, but I did. I learned what worked for me and I moved on. By about month 7 or 8, I would have told you I nailed the whole trust thing and I knew exactly what I needed to get to where I wanted to be. As more time passed, I eventually played again. I was as happy as a clam and I was on top of the world. And then it happened again. The same knee, the same sound, the same feeling of helplessness. Now, you would think, given the fact that I had just done this before, I would know what to do. I would know the tools I needed to be successful, and I would know how to avoid that loneliness that really filled my heart. Unfortunately, that's not how the story unfolded, or it is still currently unfolding. Rehab is like a roller coaster, and you never know when the ups and downs are going to come. The hardest thing about that for someone like me is I'm truly a perfectionist. I wanted to be able to conquer this rehab knowing that I had an experiment beforehand and I was going to proceed like a star. That's also not what happened, unfortunately. I learned to lean on my teammates, I learned to ask for help, and I eventually made it through. Like I said, things happen unexpectedly and you never know what's going to be around the corner, just like a roller coaster. But I have learned, and I'm very proud to say, that I've realized that both community and trust are definitions that are malleable. They change over time and you never really know when you're going to need them. But if you offer yourself the grace and the time to move with those changes rather than holding firmly to the definitions you thought that you knew, everything will be okay and the roller coaster does end eventually. Thank you.
My name is Ben Harold, and this past year, I learned to share stories through shoes. Really, really cool shoes. See, through shoes, I learned of a single mother with 4 children who works, goes to school, and takes one of her children to cancer treatment just down the road. Through shoes, I have learned of a 3-year-old who in a single year spent 123 nights in the hospital and endured 7 weeks of daily radiation. Over this past year, I have learned an incredible number of stories and have learned about the incredible power of simply listening. See, the reason I'm up here, the reason I have this opportunity is not because of brilliance or a great personality, I promise you. The reason I'm up here is because I listened, genuinely and without an agenda. I listened to one girl talk about Veggie Tales and Archibald the asparagus, another about hammerhead sharks, another about how I reminded him of Joe Burrow, which was a phenomenal confidence boost, albeit, a bit of a stretch, but it was conversations such as these, the conversations that extended beyond cancer, the conversations that the children wanted to have, that I found myself grow closer and learn the most about how I could help them without ever having to ask the question, how can I help? I learned that in many cases, just listening is the help. And by that same principle, I created a project called Shoes for Hope, which aims to give these children an opportunity to share their stories and be listened to on a national level. Shoes for Hope connects children who either actively or have previously received cancer treatment to their local men's and women's college basketball programs. And as part of the project, each child is given a pair of shoes similar to my own that at a painting session, kind of like a blank canvas, they're given the opportunity to custom paint the shoes alongside players and coaches, such that by the end of the session, you look around at all the shoes. Some of them have sharks all over them. Some of them have otters. Some of them took inspiration from Jackson Pollock. But, the purpose of these shoes is to give these children an opportunity to express themselves, to share their interests, to share their passions, and most importantly, to share their story as they so choose. And in order to share this story further, the coaches who participated in this program then wear the shoes that these children created at the annual Coaches versus Cancer game, such that the minute they step foot on the court, these children's stories are being seen, they're being heard, and they're being listened to. And my intention, why I chose shoes, why I want a collegiate coach wearing the artwork of a 3-year-old on their feet, can be explained by the artwork found on my feet. See, as I've been up here, I'm sure you guys have seen my shoes. They're really sick. But some of you, at first glance might think they're slightly unfashionable or maybe not business casual. But to me, they mean the world. These shoes were created by one of my very close friends who, right before high school graduation, was diagnosed with leukemia, and whose cancer journey has made her feel as though these first glances are all she can get from those around her. That she is a cancer patient in room 304 and no longer tests the yoga enthusiast, the guitarist, or the Swiftie, which is a new term I learned. And so being her friend, I gave her these shoes as a way for her to express herself, to share her story, and to remind her that Tess is still very much there. But beyond that, me in Virginia, her in Wisconsin, I thought the best way that I could support her would be to stay in touch. And so we FaceTimed. And as I was writing this speech, as I was thinking about what I was going to talk about, I reflected on these FaceTime calls and how they may or may not have helped her, and I realized how much more they had helped me. See, I can stand up here and say without a sliver of a doubt that if I ever fall down, if I ever need support, if I ever need someone to listen to me other than my mom, Tess is there. And that's not because of a single thing she had done or a single quality she had. It's because for several years she has consistently FaceTimed me about nothing more than Taylor Swift's carbon emissions, about her mom's expansive wardrobe, or about how my mom just figured out how to comment on Instagram and has since commented hearts on all of my posts, which is super cool. But see, it's because she was willing to have those conversations for so long that I know that when the conversation turns to something more serious, she will be there. She will be there. And she has taught me that this kind of listening, this listening without an agenda, listening with no requirement or responsibility, is how you form the deepest of human connections. And it is why I am so incredibly motivated and passionate to form these connections with the children at Shoes for Hope. The reason why I listen to them talk about VeggieTales and, hammerhead sharks. And so my hope is that when you look at these shoes, you are reminded to listen and not solely rely upon a first glance. And the response Shoes for Hope has gotten has shown me that this community, this Charlottesville community, is listening. At this point in time, there are over 40 local children participating at this program at both UVA and Virginia Tech. And this past month, all of their shoes were worn at the annual Coaches vs. Cancer game and have since been signed by all of the coaches and are currently being auctioned off, with all proceeds going to the pediatric oncology departments of the participating programs. And while I'm incredibly proud to say, to kind of just know that money is coming back to this incredible cause, I'm even more proud to say that this project has created a community that listens, that wants to listen. There was a second grader participating in the UVA program who, right before the game, fell ill and was admitted to the hospital. He was unable to see his shoes, unable to be recognized at halftime, but the community listened. Over 35 people, friends, family, advocates of this little boy's story, bought tickets to the game, went to the game, and told his story when he was unable to. The community listened. Coach Young, the head coach at Virginia Tech, calls to check in on the 5-year-old that painted his shoes. A D1 college coach is calling in to check on a 5-year-old. He listened. Tony Bennett spent a portion of his press conference talking about the children's stories. And after the game, took an 11-year-old who painted his shoes back into the locker room to spend one-on-one time with him. He listened. President Ryan, I saw on center court, kneeling next to a 6-year-old talking about Pokemon. President Ryan was talking about Pokemon. He listened. See, my name is Ben Harold, and over this past year, I've learned the incredible power of simply listening, and how when a community chooses to listen, when a community wants to listen, they have the opportunity to create, inspire, and spread so much hope. Thank you all. Thank you, Tess, and I appreciate you all for listening.
My name is Abdullah Maher Al-Jarjawi, a second-year nursing student, and my story is as following. Life was normal. Everything was fine. And just like any Middle Eastern kid, I used to go to school, and when I turned home, I would throw my backpack and never see it. Play hide and seek, you could say. And never see it until the following day. That's if I had school. You may wonder what I used to do when I'm not at school. Well, I used to wrestle with the boys, have fun, sometimes fight. I'm sorry, it happens, you know. But my neighbors have a lot of stories to tell about me. I'm sorry. But other than this, I used to play ping pong, swim, have fun. Just a normal childhood, I have to say. So life was normal until 2008. I was 6 years old. And I remember the sound of the bombs echoed through the streets as the electricity went out, drowning us in the darkness. We used candles to light up our room as we all sit next to my mom, and she hugged us tight and read the Quran. I remember my dad disappearing, and I was too young to know what's going on. And every time I asked my mom about him, she would say, "May God protect him." You see, to give you a perspective on how it feels to live in a war, I would love to share a story of a friend of mine who was in his house when it got bombed. His name was Jamal. He described to me how the missile went through several walls, exploded, and pushed all the air outward, shattering the glass. And within a moment, the house became a vacuum. And the air rushed back in, collapsing everything inward. And at that very moment, the explosion then threw everything outward. As time slowed down, allowing him to describe every detail of it. I remember that my soul was sucked out of me as he described his experience. First, our eyes stared at each other. Then our souls collapsed into each other's, and I felt his pain. It was no longer a casual bond between two 12-year-olds. It felt real. And there is something that he told me that I will never forget. He said, "You know, Abdullah, before the explosion, it was very quiet, as if there is no sound to the missile. Now imagine the terror of living in a place where the missiles scream through the air faster than the speed of sound. So when you hear the missile, you feel a twisted comfort. What a reality. Which means when it was silent, you never know if it was your last moment." You know, people go through wars and suffer from a lot of trauma, and we can't just get over it. And such a traumatic experience can scar people for lives. And I'm lucky. I'm lucky enough to say that most of my wounds are healed, but not that many people get to say that. So out of respect for all the people who've lost their lives, the innocent kids who've lost their lives in the Gaza Strip, Syria, and Iraq, I would love to ask you to pause for a moment for solidarity and appreciate everything they went through. Thank you. See, my story doesn't end here. After I left the Gaza Strip, I came to America, and it was a very, very long story, but for the convenience of the event and the timing, we're gonna skip. It took us 3 years. We got to America, and I was like, all right, we escaped the war, there is nothing to worry about, right? She knows. No, I was wrong. I was very, very, very wrong. I faced new challenges in America, whether it's the language barrier, racism, discrimination, I don't know, losing 2 academic years, becoming low income. There was a lot going on. And even though I was not in an active war zone, but in my head, it felt like one. Now, imagine how sad it is to see all your dreams shattered before your eyes because you cannot speak English. That was my reality. And funny enough, my English was so bad when I first came that I needed to practice numbers. I was just counting, and I got wrong, and I count again, then I got wrong, and I count again. It took me like maybe a week or two, but I figured it out, you know. But it was really sad, and I didn't know what to do. but I was determined. You see, I'm the son of the Gaza Strip, and I was very, very determined. Go for it. Fix it? Yes. It's gonna take 1 second. All right, thank you. See, I'm the son of the Gaza Strip, and giving up is not in my dictionary. So what I did was search for opportunities, ask for help, learn English, and look for the positive side. And trust me, it wasn't easy. There were nights when I wonder if there will ever be a sunrise in my life. It was very dark. And I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and every time I've made a mistake, I would learn from it and grow. But one of my biggest mistakes was accepting a job as a janitor for $4 an hour, because I needed to. And just around that time, and when life seemed to be the darkest it could ever be, the sun had finally rose. It took 3 years. It was the moment I received an acceptance letter from UVA with a full ride scholarship. You see, when I first came to America, I felt like a Rubik's Cube. That was not supposed to be a joke, but sure. It was supposed to be a joke, but I was joking with you all. Anyway, so I felt like a Rubik's Cube, all mixed up and confused, but with the help of great mentors and organizations, I was able to solve the problem. And without their help, I would not be here, I would not be who I am, I would not have got the full ride, so I'm forever grateful for them. And I have much respect for them. You know, they had a lot of dedication to help immigrants just like me reach their full potential and achieve their dreams. So I asked my mentor, what's the most important things the education system should do for immigrants? And he said, to listen to them and offer them guidance. I was like, what do you mean? He said, there are voices out there that are not heard. There are stories out there that are not heard. And they're just so powerful if you just listen to them. And throughout our conversation, he made me realize something. He made me realize that we immigrants all have the same stories, and we don't have much of a choice. You see, we didn't have a choice but to leave, to say goodbye to all we knew. We left behind familiar faces and places, even the comfort of our native language and land. We had no choice but to seek a better life as we traveled down a dark and scary path, hunted with fears and unknowns, filled with tears that held a scent of hope. We had no choice but to dream, to believe and trust that our sacrifices and struggles would not turn into dust. We had no choice but to be immigrants, to find a place in this world, a place to call home. This realization transported me into my memories when I was a kid. I remembered the 6-year-old me who just witnessed a war for the first time, the 12-year-old me who had a tough conversation with Jamal, and the 17-year-old me who was working as a janitor for $4 an hour, thinking there is no way out of the darkness. And it clicked. This is not my story. This is not about me. This is about millions of other immigrants who had to deal with wars and traumas and left their home country, came to America and felt hopeless and did not know what to do. So for the next 3 years, I became an advocate for immigrants and refugees, and I worked with the Houston School District, in which this past summer, I was able to have a contract with them to work on a website as a full guide for immigrants. Because I believe with a little bit of hope and help and support, every single other immigrant can solve their own Rubik's Cube. Another goal of mine was to create a platform for immigrants and refugees to have their voices heard. So with the help of the Houston School District, I was able to, and am still working on, making a platform and making that dream a reality where more than 200 schools within the Houston area have a platform for immigrants, allowing 80,000 multilingual students to have their accent heard and their story heard. You see, it's not just about Houston. Even in UVA, with the help of UVA Nursing School, during Global Week, we were able to create an Accent Day event in which UVA students were able to share their stories, accent, traditions, food, and who they are with the community. And my hope for this event is to grow and become on a university level. And by doing so, UVA, just like Houston School District, will open the door for other places, universities, schools, and even districts to follow us in this tradition. And you know, who knows, maybe one day an Accent Day will be a national tradition. You see, from the war-torn streets of the Gaza Strip to standing here in the rotunda of one of the most prestigious universities in America. It's crazy. It's been a long journey for me, and I've had a long life filled with struggles and accomplishments. But my greatest achievements is none of the stuff that I said. My greatest achievements is on those around me to see me for who I truly am and never judge me. I've proved to them that even though I have brown skin, Middle Eastern heritage, Islamic faith, broken English, that I'm also a human being deserving of respect and acceptance. My greatest achievement is to make people around me realize that minorities are just humans like them, with stories that are worthy of hearing. As Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in this world, but I know I cannot do it alone. And I know that my story is just one story, and there is millions of other immigrants out there who are fighting in silent battles, hoping to just get accepted or maybe get their way out of the darkness. So I ask you to join me and be a part of that change to make America feel home for everyone. Thank you, guys.
Good evening. My name is Caitlin Winston. When I got to college, all I wanted was a normal experience. Nothing fancy, no life-changing moments, just normal. And I know that sounds kind of contradictory to what we're told our whole lives about what college is supposed to be. But if I'm being honest, I didn't really buy into the whole all-encompassing college experience. You see, I'd grown up in the same town my entire life, and it was a very small town. And almost all of my extended family also lived in that small town. So I didn't think I'd ever find another community that I felt such a strong connection to. So when I got here for my first semester of my first year, I did just that. I had a very normal experience. I made some great friends. I joined a couple organizations that I really liked, and I enjoyed my classes. But at the same time, I still didn't feel like I was a part of it. There was something missing. I didn't feel that connection to this community yet. That was until the evening of November 13th, 2022, when everything changed, not only for me, but for every student on this campus. That evening started out like most Sunday evenings would go for me last semester. I was at a rehearsal for an organization called First Year Players. If you don't know what First Year Players is, it's a completely student-run organization in which upperclassmen put on shows for first years to perform in, to give them a place to perform and a community to be a part of. It was about 10:30 at night, and we were finally on the finale, almost done, when all of a sudden the upperclassmen announced that there had been an active shooter on grounds, and that they'd be locking all the exterior doors, but just to finish the scene. Now, at this point, I was more confused than I was scared because, if I'm being honest, as a first year in their first semester, I didn't really know where Colbeth Road Garage was. But anyway, as soon as I got off stage, I checked my phone and I got a flood of text messages from worried friends and roommates asking me where I was and if I was okay, as well as one new blaring UVA message that said, "Run, hide, fight." Now, this isn't a text from your school that you ever want to get, but especially not your first time being away from home. I think we were all beginning to realize how serious of a situation this was. Now, we weren't in any immediate danger, but we weren't in the best situation either. We were rehearsing in the Student Activities Building, which, if you don't know, is basically a concrete box with a couple of doors and a couple windows. But the only furniture in it was the furniture we had put in it for our show, and the heating was mediocre at best. I started focusing on myself. I made sure I got on my costume, I had my sneakers on, I had my jacket nearby, and I was charging my phone. But as I was doing this, I started to notice all these efforts going on around me to keep the building secure. Students were barricading the doors, blocking the windows, monitoring the police scanner, and even created an escape plan for the worst case scenario. It was an incredible group effort. I think we all realized that we needed to trust each other with our lives. And even in these terrifying circumstances, these students took action. But what was even more inspiring than seeing all these efforts was the love and the community that I felt. You see, I'd accepted that I needed to give over my trust physically to these students, but I still hadn't opened up emotionally. When something bad happens to me, I'm not exactly the kind of person that the first thing I do is I go and tell someone about it. I don't open up about it. I retreat in. And so I sat there in a corner of the Student Activities Building on the concrete floor against a concrete wall, freezing, hungry, eating whatever I had left of the box of Triscuits that I had brought to rehearsal that day, and scared. I was so scared. But these students wouldn't let me sit there and feel alone and scared. They were going to make sure I was okay. I'll never forget how many students came up to me and asked me how I was doing, if there was anything they could do for me. And I'll always thank them for that. It was to the point where it even inspired me to get up and go ask others if they were okay. You could ask anyone that was in that room that night. The love and community we felt for each other was very real. We were in that building for 11 hours, and by the end, we were all very hungry, very cold, and very tired, as our only options for sleeping were either the concrete floor or the metal chairs that we had put together to create an audience. I remember driving back around New Dorms area to get back to my dorm, and I'll never forget how quiet the campus looked and felt, and how empty it felt. It was as if the school was paused in time, with everybody wondering how we were going to find a way forward, myself included. We were given the option to go home. Classes and homework were all optional until the end of Thanksgiving break. And some people did go home, and that's what they needed. But what impressed me so much was how many students stayed. How many students felt such a connection to this community that they felt they needed to be here in the school's most difficult time. I'll never forget how many students showed up to the vigil, not even 24 hours after this traumatizing event happened to them. How many artistic tributes I saw. How the students supported each other both publicly and privately. And I'll never forget looking around JPJ in awe at how many students had stayed a week longer than they had to celebrate the lives of their classmates. I learned a lot about UVA students in both that night and the aftermath. I learned that UVA students are proactive. I learned that UVA students are brave and resilient. But most importantly, I learned that UVA students stand by each other, for better or for worse. We don't have to be best friends with every single person we meet, and we're not going to be. But we all know that deep down, there's a bond that connects to all of us. Once you give your trust and your love over to this community, it's going to be taken care of, and it's going to be reciprocated. That's what makes this school so special, this community and these students. It was then, in the most unlikely of circumstances, that I finally realized what it meant for your college to be your home and for your peers to become your family. Thank you.
My name is Ben Allen, And as I prepared to tell you this story tonight about what I have learned about a community of trust, 2 words echoed through my mind: humility and vulnerability. And I tell you those 2 words now just because I'm about to tell you an adventure of tales that may seem disjointed, but I promise I will relate them back to those 2 themes. I think it makes the most sense to start with my current job, a job that I believe I am woefully unprepared for, a job that I had no formal training for, and actually when I took the job, there was no guidebook or anything to it. And President Ryan, I'm not talking about my current job as the executive director of the UVA Equity Center, or even an intelligence analyst at the 2300 Military Intelligence Group. I'm talking about my job as a father. There is nothing more humbling and nothing that causes more vulnerability than that of being a dad. I think it starts fascinating enough with my son Eli when he was born. My wife and I thought we had crushed it. We thought that people told us that we had an easy baby. When he was born, he slept like clockwork. He ate when he was supposed to. I still remember one of our friends gave us a gift certificate to a downtown restaurant, and we took him downtown, and he sat there and smiled and cooed and laughed while we ate there and enjoyed our meal for hours. We thought we had won the lottery with babies. As a matter of fact, we would say to each other slyly, I don't know why people think parenting is so hard. We got this. And then my daughter Sophie was born, and she quickly humbled us. Now keep in mind, Eli wasn't a scheduled induction. I never would have thought that within a given time frame, you can literally schedule your child's birth. We walked into the hospital that morning at 7 a.m. and said, hey, we're the Allens, we're here to have our baby. And they said, well, right this way. They took us up to our room, and we got there. I even remember taking calls that day for work. And keep in mind, this is the male perspective. Taking calls from work. We went through, the nurses came in, the doctors, it was a scheduled routine. There was a birth playlist of John Legend and Dave Matthews. And later that night, our son Eli was born. And so for Sophie's birth, our second child, we thought, why would it not be the same? We scheduled her induction for August 10th, and we went on with our plans for that summer. The morning of August 3rd, I woke up, and all of a sudden I noticed my wife was not in the bed. Not too abnormal. I went downstairs to check on her, and she was on the couch. I said, honey, what are you doing? She was looking at the clock on the TV, and she was trying to time her contractions with the clock as it was ticking on the TV screensaver. I said, well, maybe we should go upstairs and lay down. And like any good husband with sound medical advice, I gave my 37-week pregnant wife the advice that, hey, honey, take a shower and have some water. It'll be fine. After she gets out of the shower, I am trying to talk to her, just make sure everything's okay, and she can physically not talk to me. So I call labor and delivery. I explained to them the situation. They said, you need to get here now. Now? Yes, now. I called our friends across the street. That was our plan A, to come over and watch our son Eli, who at the time was about 2 years old, who was sleeping peacefully. They didn't answer the phone. I call our second plan, plan B. Now keep in mind this is a week earlier. That couple was now on vacation, and so they were out of town. So I'm literally staring at my wife, who is asking me why I'm not going fast enough, and then staring at my sleeping son and saying, well, I guess you're going to come with us. Luckily, I was able to go to Plan C, and we were able to get our friend to come while we rushed to the hospital. I rushed into the car, get my wife in there. We live just off of Fifth Street. And now as we're going down Fifth Street, if you're going through Fry Springs and Azalea Park, I'm taking the turns like Dale Earnhardt Jr. My wife is going, go, 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 faster. And as I'm going faster, she's like, no, slow down. And we come to literally a screeching halt outside of the UVA hospital. Go to the front doors and let her out. The doors are locked. This is still in the height of COVID. So my wife goes, brushes me off, and says, I'm going to go to the emergency room door. It's a block away. I drive ahead to alert them. They get the wheelchairs. The attendees come out, and they get her in the chair to go forward. I go and park the car. I come back. They whisk me upstairs. She's already hooked up to all the machines. The doctor comes in and does his check. As he does his check, he goes, oh, she's going to come here soon. What's soon? I'm thinking 3-4 hours, 15 minutes. My wife looks at the nurses and goes, oh, what about my epidural? Oh, honey, we're too close for the epidural. The nurse chimes in and goes, the only thing that you can do is to have this baby. you are so strong, so strong. And this is at the moment when I really realize, and it's a quite humbling moment, that men in this situation are truly worthless. Because all I could do was hold her hand and say, honey, yes, you are strong, so strong. Sophia, we left our house at 4:34 a.m. Sophia was born at 5:05 a.m. There is nothing more important that I realize in that community of trusting the doctors, of trusting the nurses, of trusting that we were in the best care. I'm truly humbled by the fact that we live close enough to one of the best healthcare systems in the world, that I had a car that worked, that got us there, that I had health insurance, that I had a cell phone, that I had all these things that came together to bring forward the birth of my second child. I know that many are not as fortunate and that the system is so vulnerable. Vulnerability. Vulnerability has not always been something I've been good at. It is something that is truly, at the core of it, nothing that is in my fabric. You see, I grew up a black male here, right in Charlottesville, Virginia, in the South. I had a childhood where proper emotional responses was not something that was fostered. The biggest influence in my life in a positive way was my grandfather, who was an old Marine who was tough as nails. Literally, I once saw a nail go through his hand and the man did not flinch. I'm a soldier in the U.S. Army. None of those things are a recipe for vulnerability. But I believe through our kids, we want the best for them, and we want a community to be around them that we are grateful for. And I believe that you cannot be vulnerable in a place that is without trust. And we also know that trust matters, and that this place matters. It is not lost on me that when I was a second year here at the University of Virginia, I used to go on runs at night, and they were angry runs because of the stress of the world was around me. And I would start at my apartment on Wortland Street, and I would run down around grounds, and I would sit right here on these steps, and I would put my hands on my head, and I would bawl, crying, because I felt so alone in a place where I felt seen as so extroverted, seen as having so many friends. And I would sit here, I would work 40 hours a week at Mincer's, taking 19 credits, thinking that no one cared and no one knew the struggles. But what I've realized in this time is place is so important that on those same steps, I asked my wife to marry me, who is the anchor of my community of trust. And the night before my first child, Eli, was born, my wife and I, and our dog Rugby, yes, named after Rugby Road, came to those steps and took a picture of our last night as our family of 3. I say all these things because as I look back at my life and I look at what brought me even to this stage tonight, it is truly the community of the people around us, our friends, our colleagues, and this idea that we have this humility to open ourselves up and allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to let others in. I am so grateful for this opportunity, and for that I am truly humbled. Thank you.
Wow. So I don't know if anyone else has a mysterious liquid trickling from their eyes, but if you're like me, there are a couple boxes of tissues floating around the room. I had to take a few myself. I first want to thank everybody for being here tonight, but especially the people who made Double Take a reality. Those people being Sarita Mehta, Matt Weber, Ms. Sherry, our Office of Major Events, and everyone else who helped out in between. So let's give them a big round of applause. And I also want to thank President Ryan for establishing the tradition of Double Take here at UVA. As he said before, and as our storytellers shared tonight, it is very difficult to describe the power of a story, but sometimes you can see how it creates community like it did here this evening. And so I'm just so grateful that we have an event like this and that was able to happen here tonight on grounds. I also want to thank our storytellers for being so awesome, for agreeing to do this event. It takes an immense amount of courage to dig deep and to stand here on this stage and to share a part of yourself with everyone else and a room full of strangers. And so if we could give a huge round of applause again to them for their time. It truly was a gift for you all to share your stories, and so sincerely from the bottom of my heart, thank each and every one of you. I also want to recognize, again, the immense amount of courage it takes to, once again, stand up on stage, but that it takes for each and every one of us to share our own stories with each other. Brené Brown, who is a resilience, shame, and vulnerability researcher, and also my personal guru, she describes vulnerability as uncertainty, as risk-taking, as emotional exposure. And she also talks about vulnerability as being this icky feeling you get inside, and I can imagine for many of our speakers tonight, it felt icky to be up here, and it feels icky for me to be up here now, standing in front of all of you, and I think that's such a human feeling. And so once again, I just really want to encourage everyone here tonight to be inspired like I am from our storytellers taking this space to be up here, and to, on your own storytelling journey, let tonight be the first step that you've taken in listening to people, and to take everything that you've learned from this evening and to continue sharing stories yourselves and with one another. Embrace that icky feeling and walk with courage in your own storytelling journey. Thank you all so much.